I have no illusions that this video is going to be popular, and by now, if you've seen the length, you know it's going to be a long one. We're delving into higher level game design theory here. Even with its length, this video won't fully and properly cover the topic. However, I'll do my best to chapter everything and make it as referable and listenable as possible. As Star Citizen finally takes strides towards becoming a proper MMO with meshing, increased player caps, raids, and a plethora of other new features, it's crucial to address a notable issue that seems to be overlooked: respawn mechanics. The respawn system is arguably the most fundamental aspect of any online game, dictating how players begin, continue, and ultimately conclude their sessions. Respawn influences every single element of design, from the time to kill to the penalty for death. It shapes the win and loss conditions, essentially defining everything in a game. No other topic is more critical to Star Citizen right now than respawn mechanics. Not even master modes. If there's an event in Star Citizen that feels dead, such as Jump Town or Siege of Orison, I promise you it isn't because of the lack of rewards, but rather the lack of well-designed respawn mechanics. Star Citizen's system is falling short in several aspects. It is excessively time-consuming without apparent justification, and lacks the necessary depth and nuance expected in MMO gaming. Surprisingly, this issue hasn't garnered much attention. In this video, I'll delve into the problems with Star Citizen's respawn mechanics and propose suggestions for improvement to enhance the overall gaming experience. Before we proceed, let's establish some terminology that will be used throughout this discussion. Feel free to refer back to these definitions if needed. Number 1, local spawn. This refers to any spawn point that is closest to the player, irrespective of its distance or type. Number 2, soft spawn. This designates a spawn point that is destructible, such as a medical bed on a Carrack or 890 jump. While these spawns can be disabled through combat and are generally less reliable, they often offer the most accessibility for content. Number 3, hard spawn. This identifies a non-destructible spawn point, such as a station medical clinic or hospital. These spawns are not disabled through combat, but could be affected by reputation, criminal activity, or ownership changes. Number 4, safe or home spawn. This denotes a non-destructible spawn point to which the player can always respawn. There should always be at least one of these available. Examples include the primary residence or Grimhex for criminals. Number 5, spawn resources. This refers to the resources available to a player at the spawn point. For instance, an L1 station offers local storage, shop for weapons and armor, refining facilities, and ship terminals. On the other hand, a Carrack provides resources that were stored on the Carrack itself, which may be more limited in scope. The core concept here is to offer all players the ability to respawn at the closest available spawn point, regardless of their designated regeneration point. Additionally, the aim is to provide players with more options for spawning upon death, not just at their designated regeneration point. Furthermore, there's a proposal to significantly enhance the functionality of respawning at vehicles with medical beds. I strongly advocate for the inclusion of this feature as it is vital for the overall health of the product. Its implementation would elevate every facet of gameplay, spanning from PvP to PvE encounters. This addition would enable players to mount a defense against station campers, facilitate haulers in recovering potentially lost cargo, or provide ground-based players with a swift return to a bunker to resume their mission. The potential applications are boundless, and the impact would be universally positive across the spectrum of gameplay experiences, as well as helping to facilitate emergent gameplay. I could offer numerous examples from other games that handle this system both correctly and incorrectly, but I want to spotlight one that should resonate with most dedicated MMO players, which is of course World of Warcraft's Terran Mill and South Shore battles. These conflicts became legendary and integral parts of the game's PvP history. Interestingly, their emergence was unintentional. The developers did not foresee Hillsbrad becoming a PvP hotspot, but it occurred due to the game's respawn system mechanics. Upon death, your ghost would spawn at the nearest graveyard, prompting you to return to your body and resurrect. With both factions possessing their own graveyards, this led to dynamic gameplay and memorable PvP encounters that have left a lasting impression on an entire generation of MMO gamers. Had players respawned solely at their capital cities, as seen in Star Citizen, this historical chapter would never have unfolded. The standard for FPS games is the session shooter, where you have a fixed team fighting another team with relatively close proximity and respawn mechanics. Star Citizen has this in Star Marine as a way to test and validate FPS mechanics. The simple goal is to have Star Marine-like experiences occur in the PU organically. This is somewhat the case with Siege of Orison, but players don't want this limited experience tied to a forced session shooter inside of the PU. They want this to happen on its own fairly regularly. How would you go about creating a Star Marine-like situation in the PU? How does it occur naturally? For this to happen, you need a few things. Players need a reason to go to a location and compete over something. These could be competing missions, or more likely, valuable resources. While getting to the area might take some time, once they are at the location, they need to be kept in the area, engaging with other players. This is the core purpose of respawning, keeping players engaged in an activity. They need to be able to sustain the fight. Closely related to simply respawning is the ability to resupply. Respawning is meaningless if you don't have weapons with which to fight. In most FPS games, you respawn with your combat gear. Some games also choose to spawn you with basic fighting gear, but give the option for more advanced gear. This latter option likely fits best with Star Citizen, separating the resupply from the respawn. These are the bare requirements for a battle to occur, and they shouldn't be surprising. Star Marine checks all these boxes. The sustained engagement is a confined area with close respawns, with your gear with you. Because of this, you can have your fight in Star Marine. All of these need to be present in the PU for any chance of such a situation to occur. The current respawn mechanics are atrocious and horrible for sustaining engagement. They are so punishing that to avoid dealing with the time waste, you want to ensure you never die. This means you approach any situation with as much advantage and overwhelming force as possible. This does not lead to a fun engagement. It leads to a steamroll or complete avoidance of a fight due to the risk of wasting time being very high, and the likelihood of being outnumbered or overwhelmed is high as a result of this. Resupply mechanics are equally atrocious and tedious. Buying equipment, not all of which is available, and manually equipping everything from medical pens to guns to magazines in your packs. Just gearing up is a time-consuming affair, none of which you have to do in Star Marine. Places to fight are sparse and not meaningful. This will come with more features, but due to the size of the world, getting an actual FPS fight is very rare. And if it does happen, it's likely to occur at a salvage yard with an ambush to kill someone trying to offload drugs, so those drugs could be stolen and sold. The salvage yards are an example of a reason for people to go to such a location for a fight. However, there are no respawns anywhere near them, and by the time you could return from a single engagement, it is many minutes later, and the people you were fighting are likely long gone. Without these three things, combat in the PU will never be anything more than ganking. With no way to return to your team in a relatively short time, no way to quickly get resupplied, battles can never be sustained. Tackling each of these requires different approaches, but the most basic of which is the respawn mechanics. Like I said, there will never be a sustained, organic engagement in the PU unless something is changed. The game actively goes out of its way to make things tedious for players to do infantry combat. So much so that dying is an extreme inconvenience that is to be avoided at all costs. The core to having a good FPS experience is that dying needs not to be a huge inconvenience. So players are willing to take risks and engage. And by doing this, they are providing content for each other. When respawning is a huge pain and death is a major inconvenience, players will go to great lengths to avoid that inconvenience by stacking the odds in their favor by creating extreme mismatches, which aren't really fun for either side, or by simply avoiding engagement altogether. Now, I want to be very clear. This is not to say I'm proposing that you respawn very close to your body with a full set of gear. This is merely an example of the concept, and the concept is malleable. It can be modified in any way necessary to fit and best serve Star Citizen. But for that to happen correctly, the core concept and methodology behind that concept must be understood. The game currently operates with a single spawn point for each player, which adjusts based on whether they've set their regeneration point or not. For instance, players with a crime stat that invalidates regeneration point will respawn in Grimhacks. There's no choice in this matter. And if a player sets their respawn point on a Carrack, it supersedes and overwrites any other option. The current respawn mechanics present significant challenges across various playstyles, particularly for new players. Soft spawns, which are prioritized over hard spawns, can disadvantage those who inadvertently set their respawn point to a location lacking necessary resources, such as a Carrack. And remember, we define resources in this discussion as weapons and equipment, etc. Additionally, the absence of an option to respawn at the nearest location during activities can lead to delays in rejoining group activities, hampering cooperative play. Furthermore, it adversely affects the experience of PvP events like Jumptown, Security Post Korea, and Ghost Hollow. Under the current system, these fights often become one-sided and dull due to the existing respawn mechanics. Because remember, like I said, organic fights can never happen in the PU currently, and they can never sustain. Moreover, players lack a safe spawn option, exasperating issues for those stranded at locations like a Carrack or a besieged station. Without a means to return to their primary residence for readily available resources, players often resort to logging out to trigger login spawn mechanics, which differ from traditional respawning. This method can be exploited to preserve equipment or acquire a new ship if necessary, further complicating the system. Additionally, many respawn locations lack adequate resources, with L1 stations being favored for their proximity to ship retrieval and availability of equipment. In contrast, locations like Orison, Area 18, Lorville, and New Babbage are highly inefficient, requiring multiple shuttles or transportation methods to navigate between respawn points, starports, and shops. This inefficiency makes them less favorable choices for regeneration points. Overall, the current respawn mechanics are overly punitive in terms of time, particularly given the prevalence of bugs that can result in player death or ship destruction. This punishment disproportionately affects new players, whose default spawn points often lead to inefficient or time-consuming locations. Consequently, players may choose to log out and go play a different game rather than spend time trying to return to their previous location, especially when engaged in activities not related to ship combat, such as infantry combat, salvage, or trading. The current respawn mechanics heavily favor solo ship-oriented activities, providing players with a flight suit upon respawning at a station. This allows them to swiftly retrieve their ship and resume content within approximately 3 minutes, with no resource burden, as they spawn with a flight suit and ship retrieval incurs no true cost. Activities like bounty hunting, salvaging, and to some extent mining benefit greatly from these mechanics. Trade running also falls into this category, albeit with some risk if performed without proper equipment. Cargo obtained from bounties similarly benefits, although having limited gear for the tractor beam and a weapon is advantageous. However, selling salvage at a yard is particularly risky without armor and weapons. It's no surprise that these activities are among the most common and preferred, given their accessibility. On the other hand, respawn mechanics penalize non-ship or ground activities to a greater extent. Many mercenary contracts and medical rescue missions often require ground vehicles for approach as well as infantry equipment. This means obtaining a ground vehicle at a mining station to resume activities and then acquiring gear, which must either be stocked or purchased and then equipped at the respawn point. Additionally, this requires more investment from the player in terms of credits, as gear incurs costs and is lost upon death. This differs from losing a ship, where the only credit costs are expediting if the player only possesses one of those ships. Activities such as mercenary contracts, medical rescue beacons, and tackling bunkers fall into this category. Ground racing and the use of ground vehicles also suffer under these mechanics, posing a challenge for players engaged in racing or learning to use vehicles that are prone to destruction and require multiple steps to return to that content. The current respawn mechanics present challenges for group activities as well, particularly in coordinating with other players for missions or crewing vehicles. For instance, consider a small group of players attempting to engage in cargo transport and bounty hunting together. Optimal gameplay entails staging ships, equipment, and regeneration points at the same location, ideally close to the activity area. However, in unfavorable scenarios, a player might find themselves on a planet, necessitating a lengthy tram ride and skyscraper run just to return to the activity after death, resulting in absences of 15 to 20 minutes or more. In more dire situations, a player may respawn at the regeneration point without stocked equipment or an available ship, requiring a time-consuming process of purchasing, equipping gear, waiting for trams, and dealing with ship claim timers. Such scenarios can lead to the player being absent for half an hour or longer, significantly delaying the group's progress, especially if that player plays a crucial role in the activity. Additionally, players who experience crashes or disconnections may respawn at their last visited location, which might not necessarily have their ships. This further prolongs their return to the group, as they have their gear but lack means of transportation. This issue is less severe for solo players or those using small, fast ships with short claim times. Overall, these challenges underscore the necessity for improved respawn mechanics that better accommodate group activities and minimize downtime for players. But what about new players? New players, or those exploring new aspects of the game, encounter particularly severe penalties due to the existing respawn mechanics. For example, new players may not yet know how to change their regeneration point, potentially resulting in them respawning at Area 18 or another city. They may struggle to find their way back to their previous location, or lack the funds or foresight to purchase or stock supplies at their respawn point. Moreover, new players are especially susceptible to simple mistakes that can lead to death, such as navigating hangar exits or encountering hazards like Lyria's deceptive cloud layer. Consequently, they are more likely to experience the respawn mechanics compared to veteran players. These negative experiences, such as respawning in a city and facing a lengthy journey back to their possessions, can be discouraging enough to prompt many players to quit. The Avenger Titans parked outside bunkers serve as a grim reminder of new players' struggles, and the numerous wrecks scattered across stations or moon surfaces likely serve the same purpose. What we're aiming for here is to provide players with choices regarding their respawn locations upon death. Ideally, they would be presented with the following options to choose from. The first would be a safe spawn, which serves as their primary residence and is accessible from anywhere. The second would be their hard spawn, located at any station they have designated as a regeneration point, such as Hurrell 1. The third option would be to respawn at the nearest available hard spawn point. For instance, if your regeneration point is Hurrell 1 and your primary residence is Lorville, but you perish on Lyria while being at ArcCorp, you would be given the option to spawn at Bajini Point, the closest location to your demise. This choice remains available regardless of where you set your regeneration point. Additionally, there's an optional fourth option. If you're in a party with access to a medical bed or bound to one, known as a soft spawn, this too would be available. Therefore, players would have a maximum of 4 spawning options: safe, local, soft, and hard. Now that we've covered that, let's delve into why I've brought up this discussion. The goal here is to strike a delicate balance between convenience and resource availability while upholding the importance of travel within the game world. Setting up a staging area with prepared equipment and ships requires foresight and preparation on the player's part. They must invest time and effort to travel to these locations in advance to organize their resources, ensuring that upon respawn, they're equipped to promptly resume their activities. However, relocating to different areas entails transporting equipment and ships, consuming both travel time and resources. This approach rewards players who plan ahead and commit to their endeavors, as they can enjoy the advantages of having ample resources readily available. Conversely, players who don't care about that or lack foresight may find themselves with fewer resources at their disposal upon respawn. The trade-off between resources and convenience becomes apparent when players prioritize swiftly rejoining their party after experiencing setbacks. While the nearest spawn points offer the quickest route to reunite with companions, they may lack resource availability. However, utilizing smaller or starter ships like cutters for rapid transportation allows players to expedite their return to activities or social circles. This system also emphasizes the value of owning multiple instances of a particular ship, enabling players to strategically stage them in frequented locations. Consequently, when the need arises, they can readily access these assets without delay. Moreover, player standings gain heightened significance, with being a criminal incurring greater costs. Law-abiding citizens enjoy advantages such as access to multiple respawn locations with abundant resources, whereas criminals are limited to Grimhex and mobile spawns, highlighting the penalties associated with unlawful behavior. As more intricate standings systems are introduced, such as player outposts or non-UE factions like those in Pyro, the acquisition and maintenance of reputation and standings become pivotal for securing respawned resources and locations. Star Citizen holds the potential to refine the balance between spawned resources and convenience through the introduction of new features. One proposed change involves allowing players to designate a regeneration point at a medical bed on a mobile spawn or another medical facility. Currently, these options are mutually exclusive, limiting player choice and hindering gameplay. The suggested modifications entail enabling players to set both a hard spawn and a soft spawn simultaneously, granting them greater flexibility in their respawn options. This would afford players the choice to respawn at various locations based on spawn types, including any regeneration points set regardless of distance, their primary residence, the nearest station in the system, or a nearby soft spawn accessible primarily to party members. This array of spawn options aims to cater to the diverse needs and activity demands of players, while also addressing issues with low resource or inaccessible spawn locations. Without such flexibility, players may frequently find themselves at spawn locations with low resource availability, resulting in disadvantages for certain playstyles while favoring others. Moreover, the segregation of regeneration point settings between mobile and station/city spawns would permit players to set their spawn points at both types without forfeiting one over the other. This affords players the choice between maximum convenience or playing alongside friends, all while retaining their primary base of operations spawn. Additionally, the primary residence would always serve as a spawn option, providing a safe respawn point. While spawning at the primary residence may occasionally prove inconvenient due to tram waits and tedious equipment retrieval, it offers a secure location for players to regroup, plan activities, or rendezvous with teammates. However, spawning at the primary residence may not always align with current activities, especially if the player is operating in a distant system. Nonetheless, it presents a secure option in case of bugs or unforeseen circumstances while exploring the game. It's important to note that the primary residence may change under certain circumstances, such as incarceration or loss of good standing, which would subsequently alter the player's spawn location. These proposed changes are designed to give players greater control over their respawn options and improve their overall gameplay experience in Star Citizen. Number 1. The nearest station. Stations conceptually function very similar to a base. Most have decent resources and the ability to pull ships, but they lack access to all equipment, ship modules, and fittings, which vary by station. They are far more convenient than a primary residence spawn since players can quickly get back into space and into Quantum without having to take trains or go through atmosphere. By making the nearest station a spawn point, players have a relatively close location to which they can respawn, retrieve a ship, and return to their activities quickly, assuming they have a ship there. However, it's important to note that claiming a ship to a location where it wasn't previously staged takes time. In many situations, unless the player planned ahead to potentially spawn there and stock it with equipment or ships, these spawns will be most convenient if the player has a starter ship or other very small vessel with a short claim timer. This allows them to return to activity, but fully equipping an army either requires preparation or waiting for claim timers. Number 2. The nearest mobile spawn. To ensure the effectiveness of this concept, reinstating the spawning options at Tier 3 medical beds, such as those found on ships like the Cutlass Red, is paramount. While larger ships like the Carrack and 890 Jump boast extensive amenities, their size and complexity can render them unwieldy for certain gameplay scenarios. By reinstating spawning options at Tier 3 medical beds, players would gain access to more accessible respawn points, enhancing the overall player experience and facilitating smoother gameplay progression from smaller medical ships to larger ones. It's perplexing why dedicated medical ships in the game are currently unable to generate players, while luxury and exploration ships possess this capability. Therefore, it's imperative to restore the respawn features of ships like the Cutlass Red. This spawn option epitomizes convenience, providing players with the closest possible respawn point to their demise. It encompasses any mobile spawn accessible to the player, such as a Carrack, within their party or any location featuring a medical facility capable of spawning players. However, this convenience comes with a trade-off, as these locations typically offer minimal resources. For instance, there might be no equipment available except for some basic spacesuits provided by the medical facility, akin to those found at stations. While this scarcity of resources may seem limiting, it highlights the strategic advantage of aligning with teammates who possess such ships. By teaming up with players who have access to these spawns, players can swiftly rejoin the group upon death. However, to fully leverage this benefit, players must plan ahead by ensuring they have some equipment on standby. To prevent potential abuse of fast travel for instant teammate rendezvous, limitations are necessary. The respawn functionality should only operate within a relatively short distance from the medical bed, typically within a range of approximately 5 million kilometers, roughly equivalent to the area encompassing a planet and its orbital bodies. Consequently, while this option facilitates quick reintegration with teammates if a player dies nearby, it doesn't enable long-distance teleportation. This maintains a balance between convenience and gameplay integrity. Now, the availability of these respawn options depends on the player's standing with their respective respawn location. If a player finds themselves in a state of disfavor, such as acquiring a crime stat, certain or all respawn locations may become restricted. Consequently, the player may have only one viable respawn option, their primary residence, temporarily shifted to Grimhex in the case of criminal status. For an incarcerated player, the prison serves as their sole respawn point, effectively becoming their primary residence during their time behind bars. In a dynamic reputation system like the one proposed for Pyro, respawn points would depend on the player's standing with the faction controlling the spawn location. Favorable relations with a faction in Pyro would unlock additional spawn options, enhancing convenience and accessibility for players operating within the Pyro system. This system encourages players to maintain positive relationships with various factions, expanding their options for respawn locations and facilitating smoother gameplay experiences tailored to their preferred playstyle and objectives. Number 1. Balance activity accessibility. The accessibility of different in-game activities varies significantly depending on their nature. Consider the contrast between a fighter pilot and a cargo hauler. When a fighter pilot is defeated, they can swiftly respawn, retrieve another ship, and continue their duties. Typically, their respawn point is nearby, allowing for convenient relocation with minimal cost. In contrast, when a cargo hauler meets their demise, they often lose their cargo, which could be located far from their respawn location. Due to this, it is nearly impossible for the cargo hauler to get back in time in a combat ship to potentially contest his lost cargo. If he and his crew would respawn together at a closer location, they may have a chance of reclaiming it from those who destroyed him. The objective here isn't to reduce the accessibility of activities that are already accessible, but rather to make less accessible activities more feasible. Ideally, every activity in the game should offer the same level of accessibility as that enjoyed by a fighter pilot. Number 2. Facilitate and encourage interaction. The current respawn system disperses players to different locations upon death, lacking a centralized spawn point. For instance, if a player is camping at a station, respawning players may scatter, impeding their ability to collectively address the situation. This fragmentation disrupts both cooperative and competitive interactions, abruptly removing players from the ongoing engagements and the immediate vicinity. To address this, players could be provided with tools to collectively confront such campers, potentially through a shared spawn point for affected players to coordinate against them. Additionally, implementing a local spawn point system would enable players to respawn nearby, preserving their presence and interactions within the same area instead of being abruptly relocated. The primary goal is to retain players in the same area and sustain their engagement, rather than forcing them out of their activities due to the inconvenience of returning. Number 3. Prevent camping. In the current system, when a player finds themselves trapped in a hostile location besieged by other players, or simply stranded in an undesirable area, their choices are severely restricted. They're essentially left with two options: persist in the perilous situation, or just repeatedly face defeat. By guaranteeing players the ability to respawn at their designated save points, whether it's their primary residence or Grimhex for criminals, they gain a means of extricating themselves from such predicaments. This not only helps players by offering them greater control over their circumstances, but also grants them the freedom to choose whether to resist or simply respawn elsewhere and carry on with their business. Number 4. Scalability. As more systems are introduced into the game, the number of potential spawn locations increases, along with the distances between them, exacerbating existing problems. For example, dying in Pyro while being bound in Stanton presents significant impracticality in relying on a single spawn point. In a persistent universe, managing multiple potential respawn locations becomes imperative, necessitating constant adjustments and movement to adapt to changing circumstances. Moreover, a single spawn point system poses the risk of trapping players. As I briefly mentioned earlier, for instance, if a player sets their respawn point to Pyro, but intends to depart the system, they may encounter difficulty if hostile players or NPCs are camping the area or have blockaded the jump point. In such scenarios, the inability to leave Pyro effectively confines the player, as respawning would only lead back to Pyro, worsening the situation. I'm sure there will be concerns I will miss, but I want to address the most obvious ones people will present. Number 1. Less rescue beacon or medical gameplay content. Expanding respawn options might reduce the need for rescue beacons, potentially impacting medical gameplay content. However, this concern can be mitigated by considering the value of medical gameplay for players incapacitated and munkers. Players with valuable gear are likely to wait for rescue rather than respawn, preserving the relevance of medical beacons. Moreover, grouping with players who possess medical ships could enhance medical gameplay by providing fleets with closer respawn points. Medics could effectively rescue dead players by providing them with a nearby respawn point, aiding in retrieving their belongings and reducing the penalty of death. This approach would encourage cooperative gameplay and player interaction. Additionally, it would promote the integration of medical ships into any fleet for any role, whether combat or industrial, as accidents do happen. Number 2. Concerns about Zerg tactics. Concerns may arise regarding the proposed respawn options and their potential to encourage Zerg tactics, particularly with soft spawns. However, there are straightforward solutions to mitigate this risk. One approach is to mandate resources for respawning on a ship, requiring players to stock up beforehand. This could involve abstract cargo such as medical supplies or similar necessities. Each respawn on a ship would consume a certain amount of these medical supplies, necessitating restocking to continue spawning. Alternatively, limitations could be imposed based on the finite capacity of ships to carry armor, weapons, and equipment, ensuring that respawning players pose minimal threat without adequate gear. It's crucial to clarify that the objective is not to replicate respawn mechanics seen in games like Battlefield or Planetside 2. Instead, the aim is to adopt systems akin to those in Planetside 1, World War II Online, or Foxhole. In these systems, abstract resources or specific equipment were often required for respawning, thereby supporting logistics and strategic gameplay. Concerning spawning at the nearest hard spawn, claim timers and travel time naturally regulate the pace of return to a reasonable level. Balancing the speed of return is essential. While instant fully equipped respawns are undesirable, excessively prolonged returns are also undesirable. Striking this balance is crucial. Implementing these proposed changes could potentially stimulate logistics with mobile spawns, and the same concepts can be used to open up possibilities such as claiming ships and carriers to bolster fleet battles. However, the success of such systems will ultimately hinge on how they are implemented by CIG and how they are received by the player community. This is very much high-level game design theory, but I think it is something that needs to be discussed. Star Citizen's PU, in its current form, is one of the most boring experiences a player could have, and the majority of that is a result of the excessive time restraints and poorly thought out respawn mechanics. People seem to think events like Jumptown are dead due to lack of rewards, but that is surface level thinking at best. They're dead because it is impossible to start and sustain engagement because of the current respawn system's inadequacies. Listen, I have no illusions that my suggestions are ever going to be implemented, and if they were, I did not expect it to be done 100%. As I said earlier, the concept is malleable, but the methodology must be understood in order for it to be changed to work within the constraints and design goals of Star Citizen. But I could tell you right now, with complete confidence, that if the spawn system isn't changed, and organic content isn't given a chance to begin and sustain as a result of the current bad spawn system, this game will struggle as an MMO and only become one of the most boring games anyone could ever imagine playing. And I don't want that. Star Citizen deserves better. It deserves to be the best MMO game ever made, and I'm confident CIG can do that. So confident they became a Legatus tier backer. I just think that this is an issue that people aren't really thinking about or discussing, and it is about time we started doing just that. Let me know what you think in the comments. Share this video around and help me get the concept and ideas out there. I'm not just depending on you. Star Citizen is depending on you.